When I first heard the sound, I thought it was the pipes expanding in the cold. A dull, rhythmic thud that came from somewhere behind the wall of my bedroom. I'd only been living in that house for a week, and I assumed it was just old plumbing settling in after years of neglect. The house was cheap and a little run down, but it had character. Wooden floors that creaked in long, uneven sighs and wallpaper that looked like it had been there for decades. I told myself it was normal. That night, the knocking came again. It started faint around midnight, then grew louder until it was steady like something methodically tapping from behind the wall. I got up and pressed my ear to the plaster. The rhythm stopped the second I touched it. There was only silence, but it wasn't empty silence. It felt aware. I backed away and tried to ignore it, but sleep didn't come easily. In the morning, I checked the walls for pipes or ducts, but there were none. The wall in question was solid plaster backed by wood framing with no reason for sound to come from within. Over the next few days, the knocking returned every night, but never at the same time. Sometimes it would start when I was in bed, sometimes when I was reading on the couch. Always slow, always deliberate. I began to notice that it seemed to follow me through the house. If I moved from one room to another, it would begin faintly in the wall closest to me. I told myself it was an echo from outside, maybe a neighbor or a branch brushing the siding, but when I stepped outside, it stopped completely. The air outside was heavy and still. My nearest neighbor lived nearly half a mile away across the woods. The house stood alone, surrounded by tall trees that swallowed sound. That realization sank in deep enough that when I went back inside, I found myself whispering without meaning to. The walls felt close, like they were listening. On the fourth night, I decided to find the source. I waited until the knocking began again from the wall near the kitchen. I pressed my hand to the plaster and counted. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 more. The rhythm was almost human, like someone trying to communicate, but too tired to continue. I tapped back without thinking 3 times, then waited. The answer came immediately, 3 knocks back, then silence. I froze. I hadn't imagined it. Something inside the wall had heard me and was responding. After that, I couldn't stay in the house in the dark. I left all the lights on and slept in the armchair with the TV muted, but even then I could hear it. The knocks came from different walls, as if it was moving through the structure itself. Sometimes it was above me in the ceiling, sometimes below the floor. Once it came from the wall right behind my head, and I felt a faint vibration like a hand pressing gently from the other side. I called a contractor to inspect for animals, but when he arrived and cut a small hole in the drywall, we found nothing. No droppings, no insulation damage, no evidence of rodents or pipes. Just empty space between the studs. He looked confused and said it was the quietest wall he'd ever seen. That night, I patched the hole myself. As I was smoothing over the plaster, I heard it again, a single knock from deep inside the wall, exactly where I had just repaired it. It was followed by another, then another, faster this time, like something eager. I stepped back and felt the house breathing around me, the faint shifting of air and the old boards, the creak of hidden timbers, and beneath it all, that slow, rhythmic pulse of knuckles against wood. It wasn't random anymore. It had found my rhythm, and it didn't want to stop listening. The following nights became a blur of exhaustion and dread. I tried sleeping with earplugs, headphones, even the sound of a fan to drown it out, but the knocks found a way through everything. They grew bolder. At first, it was 1 or 2 in the quiet hours, but soon it became a pattern that filled every corner of my nights. I began to notice something else, something far more unsettling. Between the knocks, when the air went still, I would hear faint movements like someone dragging their fingernails along the inside of the wall. It wasn't constant. It came in short bursts, like a slow crawl. Whenever I froze and held my breath, it stopped too. The fear started to bleed into my days. I would walk through the rooms and feel cold air seeping from cracks that weren't there before. I'd find fine trails of dust beneath the baseboards, as if something was shifting behind them. I told myself it was the house settling, that old homes creak and move, but deep down I knew the difference. This wasn't random. It was aware of me. One morning, after a sleepless night, I walked into the kitchen and saw the wallpaper slightly bulging, like a bubble beneath the surface. I touched it, and it was soft, warm even, as though there was something living inside. When I pressed harder, the bulge seemed to pulse back. I staggered away, heart pounding, staring at the wall until I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But when I returned to the knife to cut it open, it was flat again, smooth, dry plaster, cold to the touch. That day, I packed a bag to leave. I told myself I'd stay at a motel until I figured out what was wrong. But as I stepped toward the door, the knocking started again, fast and frantic from every wall around me. It was louder than ever, as if the house itself was shouting to keep me inside. My keys slipped from my shaking hand. The noise stopped instantly. I stayed frozen by the door for what felt like an hour. When I finally turned, I noticed something small on the floor near the baseboard, a nail, freshly rusted, sticking out slightly as though forced out from the other side. I could see a faint smear of something dark on the wood. Not dust, not dirt. Something thicker. I tried to call the contractor again, but his number didn't go through. I searched online, and the company didn't seem to exist anymore. It was as though he had never been real. That night, I left all the lights on and sat at the table staring at the wall that had knocked first, the one in my bedroom. For hours, nothing happened. Then, around 3 in the morning, I heard something new. Not knocking this time, but a whisper. A voice so soft that I couldn't tell if it was inside the wall or inside my own head. At first, it was just noise like air moving through a crack. But slowly, words began to form. I couldn't make them out completely, but I could tell it was trying to say something. It repeated the same rhythm the knocks had followed. 3 soft knocks. A pause. Then words. I leaned in without meaning to, close enough that my breath fogged against the paint. The whisper stopped. I waited, trembling, and then the voice spoke again, low, faint, almost human. It said my name. I stumbled back, so hard that the chair fell behind me. The whisper faded, but I could still hear it, faintly, murmuring from somewhere deeper in the house. I ran from room to room, trying to find where it came from, but every wall sounded alive, like the house was breathing, murmuring in its sleep. By morning, I convinced myself I was losing my mind. Sleep deprivation, stress, imagination, it all made sense when the sun was up. But when the night came again, and the air grew thick and still, I could hear it breathing through the walls. Not pipes, not wind, something else, and it knew my name. By the 3rd week, my house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a living thing, a body with veins of wood and plaster, lungs of hollow space, and something sentient moving inside. Every night, the sounds grew stranger. Not just knocks now, but scratches that follow my footsteps, faint thuds that mirrored my heartbeat, and whispers that seemed to mimic my breathing. One evening, I sat in the dark trying to record it. I set my phone near the bedroom wall and left it running for an hour while I sat outside on the porch. When I came back, the air in the room felt thick and humid, like after someone takes a long shower. My phone screen was black, but still recording. I hit stop and played it back. At first there was nothing but silence, then faint movement, scraping, dragging, a muffled sound like someone pressing their mouth against fabric and trying to speak. Then I heard my name again. It wasn't just whispering it anymore. It was saying it clearly, almost in my own voice. When I replayed it, the sound warped. The voice wasn't just saying my name. It was finishing my sentences from earlier that day, things I'd said to myself while alone. I dropped the phone and backed out of the room, staring at the walls as if they were listening. Maybe they were. After that, I couldn't stay still. I slept in the living room one night, the hallway the next, but it didn't matter. The whispers followed. I'd wake to see shadows that didn't belong to me stretching long across the ceiling. Once, as I turned over on the floor, I felt the faintest pressure under my back, like someone's hand pressing gently upward from beneath the boards. I tore up a corner of the carpet and found an old vent that had been painted shut. When I pried it open, stale air rushed out, warm and heavy with the smell of metal and rot. I aimed a flashlight down the vent and froze. For a moment, I thought I saw something move, something pale retreating deeper into the dark, too smooth and too human to be a rat. The flashlight flickered and went out. When it came back on, the space was empty. The next day, I tried to find blueprints of the house, anything that could explain the strange structure. At the county records office, the clerk gave me a puzzled look when I mentioned my address. The file she brought out was thin, only a few sheets, and the information stopped abruptly 20 years ago. No renovation permits, no ownership records after that. When I asked who lived there before me, she hesitated and said quietly that the property had been marked condemned for several years before being mysteriously cleared for sale. No one knew who had authorized it. That night, I decided to confront it. I sat in the middle of the hallway with every light off, flashlight in hand, waiting for it to start again. Midnight came and went in silence. Then a single knock, followed by another, and another. But this time, they weren't random. They were moving, following a path through the walls toward me. When they reached the hallway where I sat, I held my breath. The flashlight flickered once. Then, from the wall beside me, I heard a voice. Not whispering this time. Clear. Familiar. It spoke with my own voice. It said that it had been waiting. The sound didn't come from one spot. It echoed through the whole wall, bouncing, crawling, breathing. Then came a faint thud, as if something pressed its weight against the plaster from the inside. I shouted at it to stop. The voice laughed softly, a dry, broken sound that felt like it came from my own throat. Then silence. The next morning, there were small cracks in the wall where I'd heard the voice, thin and branching like veins. When I touched them, the wall felt damp. I packed a bag again, determined to leave for good. But as I walked to the door, my reflection in the hallway mirror wasn't moving with me. It stood still for a second longer, then smiled faintly before catching up. I dropped the bag and ran out into the street. I stayed in a motel that night, shaking, trying to convince myself that I was safe now. But around 3 a.m, from the thin wall beside the motel bed, I heard a slow, deliberate knock. 3 times, the same pattern as before. It had followed me. I didn't go home for 3 days after the motel incident, but avoiding the house didn't matter wherever I went. The knocking followed, first in the motel walls, then in the plumbing at a cafe. Even faintly through the phone speaker when I tried calling my sister, the sound had attached itself to me. It no longer belonged to the house. It was part of me. I returned to the house on the 4th night, not out of bravery, but exhaustion every other place felt. contaminated by the same invisible presence when I opened the door. A faint hum filled the air like the echo of something breathing through the wooden frame. The lights flickered once, then steadied. The house felt warmer than usual, damp and still, as if it had been holding its breath. The cracks in the hallway wall had spread the plaster soft around their edges, the air thick with the smell of mildew, and something sweet beneath it like decaying fruit. I placed my palm against one of the cracks and felt the faintest vibration, not random this time. Rhythmic, deliberate, like a heartbeat. I pushed harder and the plaster crumbled easily, revealing a gap. Behind it, the wood looked newer than the rest of the structure, pale, and what I shone a flashlight inside and froze. There were scratches on the wood, deep, narrow grooves carved over and over the same pattern like marks from fingernails. I forced the gap wider and saw something glinting faintly deeper within metal. I reached in with a trembling hand and pulled out a small object, a rusted locket, still wet with something that wasn't quite water. I opened it. Inside was a photograph, faded and curled, but still visible. A young woman, her face half obscured by shadow, her eyes looking just to the side, as if it's someone behind the camera. And on the back, written in uneven lines, was a single word, mine. I dropped it and stumbled backward. The knocking began again, furious this time, pounding from inside the wall, the vibration shaking dust loose from the ceiling. I ran to the living room, but it followed, pounding through the floor, through the pipes, through the air itself. It was like the whole house was alive, trying to speak through every surface. Then silence, sudden and suffocating. I stood frozen, listening. The sound had stopped, but something else replaced it, faint scratching, soft, dragging from somewhere below the basement. I had avoided it, since moving in it was small and half flooded with dark water from an old leak, but now the air was pulling me downward. The hum from the walls seemed to pulse with a direction, leading me toward the basement door. Each step creaked like it was complaining. The door handle was cold and slightly wet. When I touched it, the smell hit me. First damp, wrought metal, and underneath it something faintly human. The basement light didn't work, so I used a flashlight again, shining it down the narrow staircase. The water at the bottom rippled, though nothing moved. I took a step and another. The air thicker, the sound clearer. Something shifting just beyond the beam of light. I called out softly, but my voice came back to me, twisted, not quite echoing, wrong in a way that made my stomach turn. I reached the bottom and saw the reflection of the light on the water, something dark just under the surface. I knelt, the beam trembling, and that's when I saw it, the shape of a hand reaching upward from beneath the water, not floating, not detached, moving slowly, pressing against the underside, as if trying to push through. I fell back, scrambling up the stairs, but before I reached the top, something slammed into the door from the other side of the wall beside me, a wet impact followed by a dragging sound. I burst through and slammed the door shut behind me. The house went quiet again, not empty, just waiting. The hum steady, the air heavy with the feeling that the thing in the wall, the thing beneath the floor, wasn't finished yet. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the hallway, flashlight on, staring at the cracks in the plaster, watching them slowly widen in the dim light, like veins pulsing with something behind them, something that was learning to move, something that was learning to breathe. And as the sun began to rise, faint and pale, through the windows, the knocking started again, slow, deliberate, like it was counting down towards something, toward me. I didn't make any more calls. There was no one left I could explain it to without sounding insane. Every sound, every flicker of shadow in that house had taken on its own rhythm, its own voice. The walls no longer felt solid. They pulsed softly when I leaned against them, almost like skin over bone. The knocking never stopped now. It slowed when I spoke, like it was listening, and grew harder when I fell silent. That morning, I tried to leave for good. I packed what I could and dragged it to the front door. But when I reached for the handle, I froze. The air coming through the cracks was wrong. It wasn't the dry chill of outside. It smelled damp, heavy like the basement. I turned the knob anyway. It wouldn't move. I pulled harder until my wrist ached, but the door didn't even rattle. I went to the windows next. The curtains were stiff and cold to the touch, and when I pulled one aside, I couldn't see anything. No light, no outside, just blackness pressed up against the glass, thick like water. I hit the glass with my fist. It didn't crack, it rippled. The reflection in it twisted slightly, and for a moment, I saw something else on the other side of the window. Not me, a pale outline, facing the other way, its head tilted like it was listening through the glass. I staggered back, knocking over a chair. My dog was in the corner, staring at the wall again. He didn't bark this time. His ears were flat, his body low to the ground. I followed his gaze to the same patch of wall where the knocking had always been the loudest. Now, though, there wasn't sound, just a long, slow bulge pushing outward from beneath the paint. The plaster cracked with a sound like tearing cloth. Something moved inside, twisting against the surface. A hand pressed through first, pale and slick, the skin stretched too tightly over the bones. Then another. They didn't reach out. They pushed downward, as if trying to find a grip to pull something bigger through. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the hammer. My dog was barking now, loud and frantic. I swung at the wall. The sound that came out wasn't wood breaking, it was wet. The plaster gave way too easily, collapsing in chunks that splattered across the floor. The smell that came out made me gag. Rot and mold and the thick, sweet scent of something old that had been buried. Behind the wall was space, narrow, but deep enough to crawl through. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. There was light inside, dim and blue, shifting like it came through water. The air moved differently in there. It felt heavier, slower. I could hear something breathing. I thought it was the house again, but then it stopped, and a voice, low and wet, spoke right next to my ear. It didn't say words, not in the way people do. It was more like the memory of a voice. It sounded like it came from inside me, something that had always been there, but had just remembered how to speak. The walls around the opening began to pulse. The blue light flickered brighter, and through it, I saw faces pressed into the interior surface. Eyes open, lips moving silently. Dozens of them, all overlapping, all still half-formed in the plaster. I stepped back, shaking. The knocking began again, everywhere at once this time, from the floor, the ceiling, even the furniture. My dog's barking stopped suddenly. While I looked back, he was standing at the wall, tail rigid, staring into the hole. Then, without sound, he walked forward and vanished into it. No es plus, no straged, just gone. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. I ran for the door again, pounding on it until my knuckles bled. I turned the knob once more, and this time it gave way. The air outside hit me like a wave, cold and dry and wrong. There was no light, no sky, just an endless dull, gray, stretching in every direction. The street was gone. The trees were gone. The world had folded into something else. I looked back one last time. The house was breathing, the walls pulsing gently, the windows fogged with condensation from inside. Through the nearest one, I could still see movement, the faint outline of a person standing where I had been moments before. It looked exactly like me. I took a step away, then another, but every direction looked the same, flat and colorless. I started walking anyway, and with each step, The knocking started up again, faint at first, then louder. I turned to look for the house, but it wasn't there anymore. Only the sound remained, following from beneath the ground, from behind the air, from somewhere too close to be outside me. When I finally stopped, the silence felt alive. I could feel it pressing against my chest, moving in rhythm with my breath. I put my hand against the ground, and the vibration was there again, steady, deliberate, counting, not from the walls anymore, from under my skin. And now, at night, when I close my eyes, I can still hear it. That slow, patient knock, waiting for me to answer.